I'll do the 15-minute introduction here with the PowerPoint. So I'll share my screen and we'll share that. And here it goes. Okay. Am I sharing the right screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. All right. I want to welcome everybody to our 11th annual technology showcase for the Mid-New Jersey.
Hang on.
Yes.
Sorry. You let people in.
Oh.
There's quite a few in the waiting room.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. Okay, good. Give it a couple of more minutes then as people are coming in, and then we'll share our opening presentation and introduce our keynote speaker. So we're glad to see all of you here today. For those who missed the session last night, you missed a really good session on 3D thinking. It was really good. And we could probably all use more 3D thinking.
Wow.
Okay. Do we have more people in the waiting room? Let's see, any others? No, don't want to do that either. Let's see if we can get this. All right. All right, shall we go ahead with our opening? And I will share my screen here, my projection. The cursor will cooperate here. Okay. All right. I want to welcome everybody to our 11th annual technology showcase for the Mid-New Jersey chapter of Association for Talent Development. And for those of you who are joining us who are not members, you certainly could join us. It's easy to do. And we have a lot of great programming that we've done throughout the year and that people can definitely take advantage of. And as a member, you get to join all these things for free. So that's good. And today, our title for our event is Envisioning the Future of Learning. We decided some time back that we knew people were going to be struggling with coming out of pandemic and wanting to think about, well, where are we going? What is the future? And how does technology help us do that? And so that's part of what you're going to learn today and have in terms of presentations and demonstrations. So first of all, I'd like to present our president, Oliver Pincus. Oliver is in the background running the Zoom sessions, and so he'll be busy with that today, but you can see on the screen, see his image. And we're very glad that Oliver has helped us through this year. Also, want to introduce Peter Rizza. Peter started the technology showcase, as you can see, 11 years ago, and he, for many, many years, ran it by himself. I will say that doing this in person has definitely been easier than the virtual sessions. Those are much more difficult to actually wrestle with. But we thank Peter for all that dedication that he put in all those years. And then our showcase team, besides myself, Jeff Riley, we have Thomas O'Connor, Juliet Hart, Vanessa Alzate, and they have been such tremendous help to me. I couldn't have done this by myself. I attended 2 conferences the last 2 weeks. a week long, and having run a half-day conference, I can't imagine what it takes to run an all-week conference. So luckily, there are people who are able to do that and do it well. But Vanessa is going to be our president-elect. She'll be president of the chapter next year. And I think Juliet's moving to another job as well. So we do have, again, places on our board. And for those who want to participate, you are more than welcome to join us and help out. And this is an overview of our sessions today. And we're going to start very soon with our keynote. But we are going to be having combinations of sponsors who've been kind enough to sponsor this event. And they're going to present ideas also about envisioning the future of learning. And these are our sponsors. And so we definitely want you to key in and listen to them. And if possible, reach out to them and become part of the supporting their efforts. Our speakers for today are these people. We'll introduce them individually as they get up to present. Unfortunately, Ian Coleman is ill and is not going to be able to present today. And we just found that out this morning. I think, though, I'm going to make sure that I twist his arm a little bit and have him come back in the next year and present to us as a special interest group, because I think his topic's a really good one. But Mike and Serene and Diane will all be with us. And I also want to thank all the volunteers that helped out with this. And as you can see their names, I've introduced most of them already, but we want to thank Maria Noel for doing our graphics and helping out with our marketing. Kalpana is not only helping with this session, but she is also our program manager for the year and has brought to us these programs every month. And that's a lot to do. It's a lot of work. And then I want to thank Jesse Kramer for helping me out at times with marketing and doing some things in the background as well. And then last but not least, we definitely want people to join us again at 5 o'clock. We've invited our speakers and the sponsors to return at 5, and we'll have breakout rooms with their names, and you can join us for the breakout room. But again, I did want to mention that the session with Mike Taylor, since Ian can't make it, we'll all be in the session with Mike Taylor. So if you've got in front of you the links that were sent out through the email, just click on Mike Taylor, the Zoom link for Mike, and join us at that session. All the other sessions will be as we've had them. All right, and we stop sharing. Good. So I want to turn this over to Kalpana and ask her to introduce our keynote speaker.
Sure. Thank you, Jeffrey. Good morning and welcome, everyone. I'm Kalpana Patel. I serve on the board at the chapter as the VP of Programming. And today I am honored to be introducing our keynote speaker for this morning, Tej Nerurkar. I'm sure everyone will agree that the last 20 months have been like none before. Prior to that, we were approaching gradually what we were calling a digital age. And then the pandemic happened. And we had to pivot quickly to all things virtual and digital, including Zoom meetings, remote work cultures, and remote learning. The future of work is no longer in the future. It is here. In the midst of that, how do we, the L&D professionals, stay ahead of the curve and lead on? To hear all about that, we have with us our keynote speaker, Tej Nerurkar, also known as Tej. Tej has been the North America leader for education solutions at Cognizant, a global leader in digital consulting solutions. For over 20 years, Tej has advised and implemented digital learning solutions across private and public sector clients on a global basis. At Cognizant, Tej helped education institutions and learning companies develop digital strategies to transform learner experience and skill enablement. He also provided leadership in bringing Cognizant's Learning Academy, corporate operations, and education partners together to help bridge the reskilling gap through innovative synergistic business models, because the space between corporate learning and credential is rapidly shrinking. Prior to Cognizant, Tej has served as president at Tata Interactive Systems, a digital firm that specialized in developing innovative learning experiences for enterprises and academic institutions. Tej has a degree in mechanical engineering and a master's in management studies from the University of Bombay, India. Tej is also on the Executive Learning Council for Northern New Jersey ATD. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker for this morning, Kshitij Nerurkar.
Thank you very much, Kalpana. And I must confess that I was accidentally on the Executive Council of Northern Jersey ATD, because I did not know at that time, 15 years back, that there was a mid-NJ chapter as well. So I should actually somehow get myself associated more on the mid-NJ chapter going forward.
Yes.
So I'm going to share my screen, and please let me know if my voice is clear and if the screen is resolution is also clear enough. Give me 1 second. Are you able to see my screen now?
Not yet.
Not yet. Not yet.
I think I just got a notification saying it should come up now.
Okay.
So let's see. Let's just try again. Okay. Yeah, hopefully this will work.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Is this visible now?
Maybe do you have two monitors? We're looking at, I'm only seeing the image of the Zoom board. So.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. Technology, right? That's
Yes.
what's supposed to be. Okay. Your screen sharing. Yeah, I can see my screen is shared. So I'm wondering why it's not visible to anyone. I'm going to try once more. Just bear with me. Yeah, entire screen. Share my system. How about this now?
Yes, good.
It worked finally.
Yes.
Okay, very nice. And please do stop me in case there is a glitch once again with the technology, and I'll try to maintain my pace and be sure to wrap it up within less than 40 minutes or so. So again, thanks again for introducing me, Kalpana, and I really appreciate the invitation from the rest of the board members at Mid-NJ ATD to have me speak at this particular forum today. Like I said, my name is Tej Nerurkar. It's actually Kshitij. 21 years back, somebody changed that name to Tej, and that's how it has been much easier. But I'd be, I've been called Tej for the last 20 years, so I think that's just make it. It's just very easy that way compared to most of the Indian tongue-twisting names that we have. But today's topic about future of learning and how L&D can lead the way is going to be more strategic in nature. I do want to lay emphasis on the experience that I had with Cognizant to relate to some of the data points and what we were doing there. to talk about this particular topic. I also would like to mention that I moved out of Cognizant about a month back into a new leadership position with a different company called FutureSource, which is how you see this logo of FutureSource over here. And it's an interesting engagement where I am building a digital skilling business, which is which you can see on this particular screen. It's what we're really doing is creating a business that services the edtech companies and the education and learning companies in industry. But it's a mid-sized company and a fascinating company with a lot of digital emphasis, and very excited to be here. So coming back to today's topic, I was thinking about what's a very good way of introducing what we've always heard in the last 20 odd months or so, and what we've heard about disruption. And I kept thinking about the Star Wars theme. So you should please forgive my multimedia skills because I wasn't able to sync the background score of Star Wars with this particular movie, except that you can hear in the first screen. But basically, the message is loud and clear that last 20 months were different from the months before and the years before for all of us. So what we really had was a technology, a set of technology that just was completely different from the technology that we've seen about 5 or 6 years back. And the technology which was 10 years before has been completely different from the technology that was there about 15 years back. And this pace at which changes have happened has been exponentially rapid in the last 20 months. Not that this technology has been obsolete for the last in the last 20 months, but the impact of what new technology has shown to us has been really significant in these last 20 months. And that's what I'm really wanting to talk about in today's session. So for example, we've heard about disruption, we've heard about the onward journey of digital, but what does it really mean? You know, when you think about digital, people about 2 years back would say it's a mindset. It's a kind of an approach, it's a concept. But what you really saw is the digital battlegrounds unfold in the last 3 years. These battlegrounds that were engulfed in data, in cloud, in the world of things. Nobody imagined that a refrigerator would be a Wi-Fi device. You know, that's what really happened to us in the last 4 to 5 years. And just the utilization of those things in the last 20 months has been completely exponentially and rapidly growing. And that's what's really shaking the world. We've heard about AR, we've heard about VR, we've heard about metaverse. That's what Facebook's talking about. We've heard about Linden Labs and we've heard about the Second Life also 20 years back. But these things are now really looking like they are real. And this is where the world is shaping even in learning terms. So, you know, going back to the storyline, I think this is how we are shaping even our own personal and private lives. I mean, this is the vehicle of yesterday. And I love this picture on the right-hand side, an air taxi. It really looks futuristic. It's probably a generation away from even the Back to Future movie series. But something like this is beginning to happen, as we all know. But the learning lens, how does that look? From a classroom to probably a Zoom session, which we are all familiar with. Now, the key thing I want to mention here is not the interaction and not the video or the Zoom or the multimedia that the student or the learner is expected to use in today's sessions, but the fact that this is a way of life. And that's really what we want to talk about in the next 30 minutes or so. So how is this world changing with digital disruption? I think the pace is just staggering, like I talked about in the beginning. But how staggering is it? And I think the reason why it is so staggering is all related to connectivity. So let's look at some of the data points of what connectivity looks like today in the world. This is an interesting slide that shows the traffic of internet over the last about 18 years or 19 years or so. As you can see, we were talking of 100 GB per second of data just around the time after Y2K. And today we are already talking about over 150 terabytes of data. That is the amount of data that gets exchanged over the internet. It's completely mind-boggling. The devices, the servers, the usage of cloud, the number of people who are connected, all of this is in a range that is our scale that was not even comparable to what we had 3 years back already, and which was itself about 50 times more than what it was 7 years back, and then 100 times more than what it was 10 years back, and much, much more 20 years back. So the rate at which these things are unfolding is just completely mind-boggling for us. So what are we really talking about with regards to the learning, the future of learning? It is intelligent and it is connected, no doubt about it. But we did a survey at Cognizant. We had a Center for the Future of Work where we interacted with, or we interviewed close to about 300 plus executives in the learning and education sector. So this included folks which were chief learning officers, deans of universities and institutions, executives from companies that service the learning and education space, and so on and so forth. And the data point indicates that things that we are all talking about today obviously are the ones that they see are the trends that are going to impact even their own world of learning and development. Hyperconnectivity, it's a buzzword. People talk about this. We've talked about interoperability a few years back. We've talked about things like tin can a few years back. But these things are actually real. These things are actually wanted by the business. And these things are now an expectation because the whole process of collaborating the data inside an organization from a learning standpoint is rapidly accelerating as well. These things are not anymore in silos. And I lived this at Cognizant, which is a digital company, which is a $16 billion digital company. But I lived this when I was running the L&D for Cognizant a year and a half back. So apart from, and we'll talk about the technology, the impact of technology in a few more minutes, but one of the interesting things that we all talked about is the emergence of new jobs and the pace with which the older jobs are disappearing, which we've also discussed in many other forums. But what's interesting is this particular slide. As you can see, there are jobs that are very obvious that are shaping up and coming up into our new gig world. The technology jobs, developers of apps and things like that. But this one on the right-hand side is interesting, the Zumba instructor. Activities that are very well covered virtually and which have a scale, which have a direct-to-consumer glamour, are the activities that result in new jobs today. And that's really, again, exponentially growing. That's what our research indicated. We did a survey of 21 jobs of the future, and we did a survey of, we did some research around 21 HR jobs of the future. And some of the jobs that came up were, again, related to coaching in certain areas that we were not even able to imagine maybe about 2 years back. So here's another interesting one, the beach body coach. I think these are the jobs that are now shaping up the industry, and the staggering growth that you can see, 3,000 plus multiple over the last 5 years. Over, some jobs over 100 plus multiple over the last 5 years. That's how the industry is shaping up. And these are skills that we don't know in learning and development how we are going to be able to train for the future. So the why part, why is this such an important statistic? Again, one of the research that was released a few years back, I forget the source of this particular research, but it was discussed during the World Economic Forum, was the fact that it just shows the amount of economy that would be decimated as a result of not being able to service the new jobs that are coming to shape the world today. And that itself determines how important it is to help us skill that group of people so that these jobs are well serviced by the industry in the near future. So what do we know about today's learner? And I think the best way to describe is this, right? Is the Zoom doom gloom that we've seen in the last 15 months. This is how we felt. I'm on a Zoom session right now, but it's ironic. But I think we've been through classrooms and classrooms of sessions in the last 2 years, staring at the screens, often watching videos. And that's how our learning has shaped up in the last 12 to 18 months, in a hurry, really to manage the kind of load that was coming our way. This is an interesting illustration as well, which describes how Josh Bersin felt about the connected future learner today. Obviously, a very distracted individual here, the learner you can see. The learner is multitasking. The learner is also looking very overwhelmed, considering the number of things that are seen on the desk of this learner. But I think one interesting characteristic of this learner is, despite what you can see on the expressions, that is a digitally savvy learner. And that is the kind of learner that we are going to be interacting with. We all know that. This is a learner who is able to WhatsApp as well as listen to music and attend a lecture at the same time as doing an order on Uber Eats, or possibly closing a trade on any of the Robinhood or similar apps, and while completing a session on Udemy. This is all that he or she would be doing together at the same time. The other thing is, we need to break down the old rules and write new ones, with regards to learning separated out from the work that you do. This is how the space is already. And again, this is one of the data points that came up from the Center for the Future of Work at Cognizant, based on the research that I shared earlier with those executives from the L&D space, that the impact was felt by almost 64%, by over 75% of the participants, that this commingling that's taking place between learning and the work is going to just rapidly accelerate. So work will be more and more intertwined. It will be more and more dependent. You will need to step away and do learning and come back, and again do more work, or rather change your job and reskill yourself. That's what's really going to happen. But then only 12% of the jobs are being replaced by bots. So you do have this digital paradox, that it's not necessary that technology is completely replacing and displacing what you do as a learner. So what we really need is a growth mindset. And that growth mindset is a characteristic that L&D will also have to really emphasize in building the skills of the future for the learner of tomorrow. So if I look at this particular reskilling ripple that many have described, this is a visualization that I came up with, that the rate at which the jobs are changing or expected to change, and skilling that is expected to be done, that whole loop is shrinking. The S-curve is just shrinking day by day. From the time when we were in school to the time when we are at work and in the mode where we are learning, that process is going to be shorter and shorter year on year. I recall, again, a statistic that was shared in one of the conferences, one of the education conferences, which talked about how you probably are going to be required to influence a learner, an individual, to lose their jobs. And this very, very pivotal view, that you lose your job every 2 or 3 years so that you can be reskilled to acquire a next job, which is essentially going to be the most high demand job in the future. So the reskilling ripple is really what we are dealing with, and our learners are really engulfed in this reskilling ripple today. And the L&D has to really shape up, or come up with a mechanism to unfold the dynamic forces that play inside this reskilling ripple, and put some processes in place, and put some technologies in place, so that they are able to provide the right learning to the audience. Again, another data point. This is again from one of our recent research. So we published this research. We did a report on accelerating learning transformation, and this was done in partnership with the Center, the Future Workplace Learning. So many of you might be aware of Jeannie Meister, who's a good friend of mine and a very distinguished personality in the learning and development space. So we jointly did this research a year and a half back, and we talked about this in a conference a few months back. The kind of skills that are shaping up as a result of the changes that are taking place in the industry. You can see that something like learning is becoming an important skill for the future. The curiosity behind learning to learn, that's becoming far more an important aspect of what you might be expected of the new learner, so that they are able to really build that mindset of growth. Gartner's point of view is also not different from what we've talked about so far. The engulfing of technology, the bringing together of things, bringing together of data, all of this is going to shape the new learning experience platform of the future. We've talked about learning management systems, we've talked about learning experience platforms, but there still remains to be a gap, seems to be a gap about how this platform is going to evolve in the near future. And at least personally, I feel that we haven't seen that next generation learning platform as yet. A platform that integrates the various technologies that are unfolded in our lives in the last few years. That still is not a reality. So what do we do? Do we really start investing in these tools and platforms that are inundating our workspace, our learning organizations? And I think this is a great slide to show the plethora of tools, technologies, and systems that are in the market today. And I completely empathize with this, because for about 20 years when I was with Tata, I was one of the service providers. I worked with many of these players, and I provided as a content on many of these platforms. And over the last 1.5 years to 2 years when I was with Cognizant, I was also responsible for implementing some of these technologies. And one of the most important lessons that I think we've learned is we got to go down deep with a set of technology or technologies that is only suited to our own context, on our own environment, and we are the best judge of that space. And I'll tell you some of the mistakes that we did. At Cognizant, we had learning experience platforms in plenty. We had a Pluralsight, we had a Skillsoft, we had a Coursera, and we even settled for Udemy. And it was just crazy. The learner was overwhelmed, the learner was lost, and the learner was even confused after we've had so many platforms that we were able to offer the learner. Yes, sure enough, there were tools available, but the all you can eat doesn't necessarily mean that the learning is effective. I think there are some great platforms in the industry, and I think we have to take a step back as L&D professionals and really narrow it down to a specific area where it makes the most difference to the learning audience. Now, that area could be something like, content is available, but you really want to build a culture of social learning. Well, in that case, just look for that particular tool or a platform that pushes social learning. I don't think, and this is personally my opinion, I don't think we are required to go to the route where 20 years back, organizations or enterprises were implementing multiple learning management systems. We do not need to do that. And I think we got to be really smart about these technologies. The other aspect that we need to keep in mind as L&D professionals is speed. I think this is a brilliant graphic, to be honest. I think it just shows the fact that the time frame with which we have to really respond to the audience is, again, something that we had not done in the past. And we got to really build those kind of processes and structure inside the L&D organizations to address this need that rapidly. I love this particular concept of skill bullpen. So it's almost like, like a docking station, that you have learners who are doing different things, who are part of different departments and organizations. They are encouraged inside the organization to come in and sharpen those skills in this bullpen before they get deployed into other areas. Now, clearly, this is a little bit. This is a sort of a optimistic view, because businesses do not release learners or people or associates just to do learning. They release them only when there is a reason that drives revenue, or that drives billability, or that drives some benefits to the organization. So culture, as well as the ability to work with business, is equally important when you are talking about building this agility in the organization. But it's a concept that now large companies and some departments of even mid-sized companies are trying out when it comes to investing in L&D. The third dimension, I'd say, is, again, going back to the mindset aspect and the focus on experience, the focus on engaging learner and ensuring that the experience is really top-notch. Now, the following few slides are again a few things that we've toyed up with. We've kind of experimented with at Cognizant. We are experimenting here at FutureSource as well. By no means can I say conclusively that there is evidence to back that these things work, but it's an interesting area that we are doing some research in. So we are all familiar with this graphic, right? The Queen's Gambit, which was a very successful TV series, a web series a year and a half back. And we are all aware of these statistics as well. The impact of this particular web series on the books that were sold in chess, as well as the number of participants who suddenly signed up to understand and learn about chess online. I think there's a key message here. It's about the linkage between education and entertainment. It's about emotionally attaching or appealing the value of learning in the world of a learner in an organization. It's a very it's an area where you got to be very careful about making sure that the learner is not overwhelmed by the amount of learning that he or she has to go through. And there are tools and platforms that are required to provide that sort of a setup for an organization to work with. And the leadership has to be equally committed. But it's about increasing the entertainment value of learning. It's about creating those kinds of learning curated objects which are high on the entertainment value, which are high on the engagement value, which are binge worthy. That's what is necessary over here. And I would say that it still requires some amount of effort for all of us to build that sort of an impact in learning. This is a great comparison. Why does a 30-minute online video on Udemy sound boring, but not an episode of forensics on bones, right? And you may be still learning about forensics on bones. So I wouldn't say that this is a concept that is completely proven, but we've been experimenting, and some organizations have been experimenting with these ideas about how do you really make learning binge-worthy? How do you really build in that emotional connect in the topic so that the learning may not be as long, but it is more effective, and it is just about the right size. Focus on curiosity, maybe that's another dimension, and focus on how do you make it binge-worthy. There was a data point from Professor Scott Galloway about a year and a half back about how he compared if Disney was to step into the industry and completely democratize, the Disney stories into learning for school, then you probably would have the education publisher of the world that aggregates the rest of the publishers that are there in the industry. And yet, possibly the whole learning effect that it might create would be unmatched or incomparable. So again, I'm not advocating that these are ways to treat content and take learning at a different level, because I think it's equally, there are equally cynical views about trying entertainment into learning. But there has been an effort done in some companies, definitely in our company, to try some of these concepts out. I would just say one last point on this particular aspect of learning experience, that the world of learning management space has evolved, from an LMS to a learning experience platform to a learning experience market platform, where you are encouraging a learner to create your own content. So creating that marketplace like a Udemy. I think that needs to evolve into a sort of a continuous learning platform, that next generation learning management system, if you will, that still does not exist. And it will change the way learning would take place in these organizations. So this, I feel, is the desirable state which we are a little far away from at this point in time. Now, where does this lead us with the L&D organization? So again, some are bold steps, some are implemented already in some organizations. But just an interesting comparable that I wanted to share here with everyone. And this data is available as well, that on an average, if you think about a large company, a Fortune company today, you can imagine that the L&D budget for such a company would be to the tune of $10 to $15 million, the annual budgets. And this may include the people costs, it may include the infrastructure costs, it may include the content that they service, it may include the consulting fees, etc., all that put together. But then if you look at a similar company and you look at the technology spend in that company, and I'm thinking purely digital at this point in time, then the numbers are are multiple, but they are not staggeringly different these days from what you end up spending in L&D. And I'm saying that because the world of digital has changed this radically. Now, if that is the case, then isn't it time for us to think that L&D requires very strong KPIs that are related to the technology spend? Isn't it important now for us to think of a different Kirkpatrick model where there is measurement towards the technology that is utilized for improving learning effectiveness? Monetization of learning is another aspect that is important for L&D to consider. For years, organizations have siloed themselves away from monetizing what you own, what you create on your own as learning assets. And I think it's important to consider this very, very creatively and very progressively. Because after all, if employees are your assets, your greatest assets, then you might as well be able to package the qualifications and the credentials that they have in a way that helps increase the value of these assets. It's a very clinical way of looking at learning, but at some ways it's also very philosophical. And some companies are doing that. So for example, a large system integrator company like Cognizant, or a services company, which is where people are the most important assets, the models where you train and then you hire the asset so that you can deploy that person. And I'm calling it asset, it sounds a little dry, but I'm calling that individual an asset here. But you train that individual so that the individual can be deployed on the jobs that he or she needs to do, is a way in which training has been converted into value for the company directly. And these models have now begun to exist. Another perspective we talked about is experiential learning, learning on the job. And my personal view here is, again, you need to have clear-cut KPIs, even if it is on-the-job learning. So the 70-20-10 model that we've heard and talked about for many, many years, I think it's still a real concept. It's just important, however, that the 70% of the informal learning requires those KPIs that can help you determine what's the value of that investment on the job from a learning standpoint. And the L&D team has to really work on those measures to define those ways of evaluating the value. And one other thing that I would say with regards to the structure of the organization is looking at ways to really build the L&D teams from within the business. The pendulum has swung in the last 2 decades from where we used to have centralized L&D functions with a structure to a function which is federated to a function which is hybrid, and somewhere in between the pendulum settles for. But I think there is an opportunity here for L&D to come out of the business and to be seen as a way to promote L&D rather than it being seen as a separate function which associates only to HR. So in a nutshell, if I were to really conclude, where does the L&D, how does the L&D look like in the future, considering what's happening with the future of learning? There are structural ramifications, looking at how the L&D team can be structured, whether it needs to be associated with the CTO's organization, whether it needs to have its own KPIs related to technology spend. There are ramifications related to the talent development. You got to really be able to build some sort of motivators between business and the L&D folks so that L&D is seen as a career progression within business. And I think that reality is shaping up, that's a reality that's coming up now. Agility we talked about. Obviously, the connect with the leadership is absolutely critical when it comes to business, but we've all understood this for many years. And I think the linkage to customer centricity, the monetization, the creation of value for L&D is equally important. So this then is a point of view that I had with regards to, which was also some of the, based on the research that we had at Cognizant, with regards to how this future of learning looked like, and from a lens of an L&D organization as well as from the lens of a learner. Thank you very much, and I'd love to hear any questions and comments. And I'm based in India right now. I'm traveling here. So I know that there is a window of conversation opened at 5 p.m. Eastern for the participants, which may be very difficult for me to sign up because it'll be 3:30 in the morning here. But I'll be happy to jump offline and get into any conversations if required. Thank you.
Okay. I don't see any questions in the chat, but if anybody has a question, please enter it into the chat. I do see some comments about that L&D professionals are producing professional videos. How do you see more video type of learning happening in the industry?
Immense. Bandwidth is no longer an issue. Platforms like Udemy, etc., have started to show that you need so much learning. I mean, MOOCs have been around for a few years now. And I think the platform yields very well to making bite-sized learning objects, bringing in the domain expert in that video as well at the same time. So I think video is just exponentially growing. And if you just look at the fact that even some of the continuous learning or the lifelong learning platforms are only focusing on utilization of video, this is the future for us.
So how can you kind of help us understand the concept of binge learning? Because I can understand if you're on Netflix, I watch The Queen's Gambit as well. Great show, but how will you explain that in the sense of learning within, let's say, somebody that's out on the factory floor?
I think on a factory floor, utilization of technology is in some sense a little more possible, and there are companies which have done this. I recall that even about 7 or 8 years back, we worked with a major consumer goods company out of the Midwest, and they were experimenting with two things. One, utilization of the Nintendo Wii as a device to teach certain aspects of certain motor skills. So they were doing that, and this was about just this was a window washing sort of a factory, or it's a manufacturing facility that was an acquired business of this consumer goods company. So they were experimenting with prototypes using Wii for this particular facility to train the operators in this window washing chemicals that they were using. The other example I can think about is utilization of tablets and devices when it comes to training on the machines and the operations. The whole operations manual process can be completely personalized and completely made completely interactively, utilizing those kinds of technologies. So yes, on the factory floor, I think the utilization is more easy. It's possibly better to experiment these things. The issues with regards to security are less prominent as compared to what you see in a services environment like a banking industry.
Okay, here's an interesting question. Should companies have internal TikToks? Seems to be an effective method for teaching younger generations.
I think it's a great idea. And I think in some sense, some of the companies are already experimenting in this area and piloting some big projects. I think it's a factor that motivates individuals into spending that sort of time towards learning, which is essentially going to be valuable to the business as well. So I completely support that idea. I think we have to see scale though.
Okay, yeah. I think a couple of our sponsors coming up will help support some of this. I think 7 Taps is a platform that would help not necessarily be TikTok, but it shrinks things down, makes it much more that micro learning approach.
Yep.
You mentioned the bandwidth is not a problem. I happen to actually be working with 2 clients for whom bandwidth is a problem. They're actually in the Texas, Omaha, and Utah areas of the United States, and bandwidth is hard to come by down there. And so I'm hoping that things like the new infrastructure bill, where there's more support for broadband and things like that, will help those areas of our country.
That's very true. Some sectors, even like the manufacturing sector, I had a colleague recently who talked to me about what they're doing, and this is an elevator company, and the kind of technology-enabled learning that I see over there is something that in many industries you've seen about 10 to 15 years back. So yeah, some sectors are still in the level 1 stage of that maturity model, if you will, of where they need to be. And this disruption is really going to, really put them far behind on the scale.
Okay. We do have another question. in your recent experience, how are clients assessing their cost benefits for L&D to justify budgets?
So I think it still boils down to billability or the economic value added of the associate, which is again philosophically related to that level 5 on Kirkpatrick or whatever research ROI institutes have done. I think that is the way in which you have to put models in place to determine the value. I would say that it's one, but the L&D leaders have to really commonsensically look at those approaches within the realms of their organization and the guide rails that they need to put in. And one can come up with some good assumptions and simpler models to do those kinds of justifications.
Well, as a companion to that question, he asked, what are the key L&D skills, experiences, and tools clients are expectations?
So one key skill that clearly comes up again and again now is the understanding of the technologies that you are interacting with. So which is the reason why in the slides that I shared, the affiliation to the CTO's world or the chief digital officer's world in an organization is quite essential. In fact, the research that Jeannie Meister and I conducted last year, which we talked about in the conference a year back in the Future Workplace Conference, seem to indicate that is it radical to think of the L&D as a part of the CTO's organization, which is really then bringing the pivot much more closer. Companies have tried that. So really having a good understanding of technologies today is an essential skill. But beyond that, those other software aspects that we talked about, like curiosity, learning how to learn, those are skills that need to be also present in our associates today. And the L&D needs to also appreciate those models and those approaches and be able to coach in those areas as well. And those are new areas. It's not like you have certification on curiosity behind learning. You don't understand that space as well. But then those are areas where I think we have to come up with some own commonsensical and modeling and approaches that can model the behavior that is desired in our learners today.
Yeah, I was interested in your in the presentation of the statistics, but also the concept of for future generations or maybe even current ones, we might actually have to switch jobs in order to get the skills we really need to be productive. Does that must sound logical to you from that presentation? Oops, so we get, yeah. Let's see, from the conference room, how will these changes impact the way learning is evaluated?
Yeah, so again, this comes back to that question about impacting the business. And I would say that besides the usual, ROIs, etc., the models that we talked about, or measuring the billability of an individual as a way to determine whether that person has acquired a certain skill or not, those are the tactical things that you can do. But I think it's also, the whole concept of what is it that the L&D is able to shrink, or what are the variables that are able to really make a direct impact to the business. So for example, acquisition of a talent is possibly a big problem for a certain industry. So, you will spend a certain amount of time before you can hire a person. But then can I really increase the speed to competence? After I hired that person, can I really shrink the time I require to deploy that person is going to be a factor. That may be a way of evaluating the value of that learning in that company. So really putting the guardrails around what's that business and then coming up with those commonsensical models to evaluate the L&D value to the business I think is a key over here. And those decisions can change from one company to the other. I think we don't have to really, lock ourselves down into necessarily the structures which have been around in the past. We can come up with our own models, is what I feel. And the business is quite open to listening. In any case, they don't really necessarily ask what is your score on the level 2 and level 3 of Kirkpatrick model. They don't really care about it, right? So we can come up with these models more commonsensically, as I feel.
Yeah. Another question is, could you give some examples of KPIs that are linked to experiential learning?
So again, when it comes to experiential learning, so for example, if you think about simulations and gaming, this is that you can actually look at those areas directly replicating the kind of skills that you need to inculcate in an individual.